back to In Stitches with Mary. We've had a fast and furious summer and we are in September now, ready for fall. And I have got a fun project here that I think leads right into fall, but I'm going to show you some of this in some Christmas fabrics too that I think are going to be very pretty. This I call my Tabletop Illusions, and the more you look at it, it starts to change. It looks almost like it's curving, and it's really fun and easy to put together. You just need two fabrics, a light and a dark, and some backing, and we're going to use a faux binding on it, so makes it even simpler to put together. To make the Tabletop Illusions, you are going to need to cut 6 strips of fabric, and these are 1.5 inch strips by the width of the fabric, and you need to cut 6 for your light and 6 for your dark. Now I'm choosing to use some Christmas greens here, so I'm going to make this a little more monochromatic, and I'm anxious to see how this turns out. You're going to start by sewing 4 strips of a light and a dark together, 4 strips like this, and we're going to do 2 strips where we are then going to sew with the light fabric in the center. And then we're going to do 2 strips where we sew with, let me get this out of the way, a dark center. And you end up with 2 strips like this. So as I'm reading my directions, and you'll be reading my directions, we have a dark center and a light center, and you need 2 sets like that. Once you have your strip sets put together, I want you to take it to the ironing board. And this is going to be key. I want you to always press your seams towards the dark. So on this strip with the dark in the center, both seams are pressed towards the center. And in this one, both seams are pressed towards the outside, which is the dark. This is going to make a difference when we sew things together and reduce a lot of the bulk at those intersections where the seams meet. We can nestle our seams. Also, when you do that, make sure you press it again from this side so that you are pulling those seams apart. You don't want any creases in there, because what we're going to do next is we are going to cut these using a 90-degree ruler. Now you can use a big one like we have here at the store. I managed to have a little one at home I like. It was actually more for a corner trimmer, but this worked really well for me. And you are going to cut your 90-degree with your point up at the top. You're going to cut up both sides here, and then we're going to flip it around, match up that cut edge, and cut the other edge. What I want you to keep in mind when you're doing that is that you are making sure that you are lining this up straight on that edge when you go to cut, so that you're not getting a wonky angle up here. You want to make sure that you do cut those nice and straight, and you're lining things up appropriately. Okay, you're going to do that all the way across. You're going to do it on all 4 strips. Remember, we did 2 with the dark center and you did 2 strips with the light. You're going to need a total of 20 from each. So we need 20 light centers and 20 dark center triangles. Once you have your strips set cut into your triangles, you are then going to stack them so that you have a dark center and a light center stack. This is in red and white. I'm really looking forward to seeing this completed for Christmas. And we're going to take those triangles and we're going to sew them into a square. So you're going to take your 2 light centers and face them point to point. Take your 2 dark centers and face them point to point. And we're going to make these squares. What you will want to do is to make sure you're sewing the same seam here and here. So what I've got in my directions when you do this, I want you to leave the dark side down, put the right side on top, and you're going to sew on the right side. As you're looking at it, you're going to sew down the right side. You want to make sure your seams are matching right here. And this is where it comes in helpful, where we press those seams. Now the seams are going in opposite directions, and those are going to nestle together so nicely that you can see when you go to sew these, they are going to make a perfect seam. So we're going to sew down the right hand side with the dark center down. We'll do the same thing here. We're going to have the dark center down, and you're going to sew down the right hand side. That way when you open them up and you face each other, you'll have opposite sides and it will work out real well. Let me show you what that will look like. When we have these sewn together, you are going to press the seams towards the dark center side. So you can see I've got these both pressed that way. So when we go to now sew those two together, our seams are going to be going in opposite directions and we get a nice square corner in the middle. When you do sew those, and if you've done this right and you've always sewn on the right side with the dark center down, they are going to be opposite of each other. All right? You don't want two white corners together and two reds. So this will tell you that you've done it correctly. You're going to make 18 sets like this. Now remember we had 20 stacks, 20 triangles. You're going to make 18 sets like this that are identical. So when you lay them on top, you've got a dark here and a light here, long edge. The other two, there'll be 2 lights and 2 darks left. Those you are going to sew the opposite way. And you'll understand this in a little bit. You're going to then flip this over now, and we're going to have the dark center on top, and then you're going to sew down the right side. We need 2 of them like that for when we assemble the quilt top together. Now before we put it together, I do want you to square up your blocks. This is they're going to be a 6-inch block, so you're going to want to square that up, and using a square ruler, if you have one, will work the best because you can line up your lines across the diagonal, the 45-degree angle, and trim off all of those dog ears and make sure it's nice and straight. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to assemble the quilt top. Okay, now I've gone ahead and I've sewn my blocks together. You're going to make 8 blocks. There's 2 here. You're going to have 4 in the middle and 2 at the bottom. So I've got 8 square blocks that we've squared up to 6 inches. I haven't sewn this one together yet, but that kind of shows you that's what I had used previously in the demonstration. So that's those 8, and they're going to line up like this. Our corner pieces are our leftover half squares that we've made. And this is where it's going to come in handy. Remember I said the last 2 triangles you're going to sew on the opposite side. You're going to put the dark side up and sew that right hand side. That's so that they will fit in here and in these corners. So the first 16 are all right here, and the last 4 are in these 2 corners so that they will turn and fit correctly. So what's left to do is to sew our blocks together in a row, and then we will sew our rows together, matching our corners perfectly. And then we'll press those seams. If you feel more comfortable pressing your seams open, you can do that, or you can press them each seam towards the dark side. I'll show you an example of how I've done that on this one. And your centers will open up into a 4 block. So you can try to do that way. When you do that, you do have to take a few stitches out of each seam, so it's like you started a 1/4 of an inch from the edge when you do that, and it works really slick and reduces that bulk. Otherwise, you can go ahead and press your seams open, whatever you feel more comfortable with. What's left now is to go ahead, here's a fun one we've made using some Indian corn, and I'm going to show you how to put the faux binding on this and get it ready for the backing. So to prepare our quilt top for the backing and the batting, what I want you to do is to lay your batting. Now this is already cut out, so yours isn't going to be this shape yet. Put your batting down, then lay your backing with the wrong side down, right side up, lay your backing, and then with the right side of your quilt top, with the right side facing down, so we've got our right sides together, pretty sides together. What you will then do is go ahead and cut around the outside edges of your quilt top. That's going to make your batting and your backing the same size as your quilt top. At this point, I'm going to have you put a pin. We need to mark an edge so that when we get all done, just in case you weren't quite the same size all the way around and you have some wonky corners, I want you to mark the same size so that we can match those up later. So I just put a pin here, I put a pin on my backing and a pin on my batting so that I can match those up because we're going to take them apart. So we're going to set this aside, and if you want, you can go ahead and lay your backing now on the wrong side of your top, because that's how we are going to sew it together later. And I'm just going to slide that over here. We're going to take our backing and we're going to apply our faux binding. We're going to put our binding on before we sew this all together. You're going to use strips of fabric. These are cut 1.5 inches, and you're just going to fold them in half. In my directions, I tell you exactly how much to cut each one. In this case, they're 14. You're going to cut 2 14 inches. So we're going to put this on the top and on the bottom. And the first thing you're going to do is fold it in half. Take your raw edges and line it up with the raw edges of your backing. And we're just going to do a really skinny, maybe even 1/8 of an inch seam on there to hold that in place. You're going to do the same thing on the other long edge. So we've got our long edges and our binding is on that edge. The next thing we're going to do are our 2 short edges, and those were cut about 8 inches. And the same process. Now you'll notice the binding is a little bit longer than our actual backing, and that's okay. I want it to be that way. We're going to trim that off later, but we want to make sure we've got the full length of our binding in there. The last step now is to cover our corners. And again, you stitch these on about 1/8 of an inch. The corners are going to go on. These were cut, I believe they're 10 inches. So we're going 14, 8, and then 10. So you're going to sew these on. And you're not pressing after you're done. You're going to leave them just like this. So those are on. They've been stitched on. You can go ahead and trim these corners off if you want to. And I'd recommend that you do. The next step, once those are on, is we're going to put our quilt top on top. And remember, we marked the one edge, so I've got my pin here and my pin here, so I know my edges are going to match up. We're going to line up those edges. Then we're going to put our batting down on top of that, matching up. I've got that pin there again. We're going to lay that down on top. You're going to take this to the sewing machine, and you're going to sew. I'd recommend sewing on the backing side because you can see your stitches. Sew with the batting down, you can see where your stitches are, and you're going to do that 1/4 inch seam all the way around, stopping with the needle down at the corners to turn. And the only thing you have to remember is to leave an opening to turn it inside out. Okay? Once it is turned inside out, back up. We don't want to turn it inside out just yet, do we? We want to trim our corners on the diagonal. And I actually trim my batting down. Get yourself like a little applique scissors or something. Trim the batting down to your stitch line to reduce that bulk. So once you have turned your quilt layers inside out, what you will want to do is to roll that binding, that faux binding that we had stitched on the back side. You're going to roll it around to the front. And before we do anything, you're going to take that to the ironing board, and you want to press that seam so that the stitches come right out to the edge, and press that around to the front side. When you do that, you automatically cover up the opening where you turned it inside out. There's no hand stitching to do. And all that's left to do, once you've got this pressed, it looks great, is to edge stitch nice and close to that folded edge of the binding, and go ahead and quilt your top. I just did a little stitch in the ditch. You can do what you would like to with that, and it's completed. It's all done. So if you're interested in the pattern, it is In Stitches with Mary, Tabletop Illusions, and just call us right here at Neil's Vacuum and Sewing Center and we'll get you set up. Thanks for joining me.